Okay, bonjour. Welcome back, everyone, to Proposal Power Strategies for Success. For those of you who weren't able to attend yesterday's session live, please note that both parts of this workshop are being recorded. And also, Riley from the Canadian Evaluation Society has kindly joined us again to kick us off this morning on the right foot tech-wise. So Riley's going to be posting in the chat instructions on accessing Zoom's closed captioning function and automatic translation into French, which we're very excited and grateful to have access to thanks to the Canadian Evaluation Society. Meanwhile, when I stop talking, I'm going to post in the chat a link to the ICCI's registration form, which you can fill out if you haven't already to receive email notifications of our upcoming events. And they are, as always, free. And speaking of upcoming events, I mentioned this yesterday, but I'm going to say it again. Our next one is going to be a networking activity called Surviving and Thriving with Difficult Clients. As I mentioned yesterday, this would be a chance to both grow your network of independent consultants and share what has worked best for you when dealing with a difficult client. So I'll post that too in the registration link in the chat after the introduction here. I mentioned yesterday that the ICCI is led by wonderful volunteers who are responsible for making sure that ICCI members continue to benefit from activities that provide mutual support and foster community for those interested in or practicing independent evaluation consulting. So given that this workshop is ICCI's first one following the summer break, and given that our steering committee elections were the last thing we did before the summer break, I thought I'd share with you the faces, some new and some returning, of our 2025-2026 ICCI steering committee. You might recognize the three of those faces from the people who are speaking to you today. Also working alongside this wonderful group of volunteers is Holly Zapfred, volunteer herself, who is putting together our ICCI's new website, coming soon. So back to today's presentation, Gail Barrington, Claire Levin, and I, Vanessa Anastasopoulos, are your co-facilitators for our two-part workshop on proposals. And I think since we already introduced ourselves, we can probably just jump right into the workshop agenda, seeing some nods, okay? So yesterday, in part one of Proposal Power, we kicked off the session with Gail describing some of the more informal ways that independent consultants can generate business. And then we dove right into three types of solicitations: open competitions, targeted competitions, and direct awards. This led me to talk about how to find consulting opportunities online for different types of organizations. And then Claire shared important criteria for deciding whether you should submit a proposal in response to an RFP or not. And finally, Gail ended yesterday's session by sharing two useful proposal outline templates, one for informal proposals and one for formal ones. If you missed yesterday's session, don't worry. The recordings are going to be posted on the CES website and on the ICCI's YouTube page, where you can find recordings of all our past webinars. So I will paste these two in the chat when I stop talking. Okay, today in part two of Proposal Power, we'll start by looking at how to scope and budget the work that you're proposing to do in your proposal. Then we will speak at some length about how to go about writing a proposal, including with the use of AI. And I should mention here, I could go on a lot more about the use of AI than I will today, but maybe that's a topic for another workshop at another time. So towards the end of the time we have together today, we will present information about proposal submissions and then about the what next of it all. So you submitted your proposal, what's likely to happen? If you have questions or comments during the presentation, please put them in the chat. We will address them during the Q&A after the presentation. And of course, feel free to write your questions and comments in either English or French. And the last thing I'll mention before I pass the floor to Claire is that in the days to come, watch your emails because we will send you a copy of our slides and information about the sources that we have been mentioning yesterday and today. On to you, Claire.
Okay, thanks, Vanessa. Hi, everyone. Great to see you all again. So we're going to dive right into scoping and budgeting, which is maybe one of the more challenging aspects of proposal writing. So the first thing is, and sometimes I think that budgets are a little bit more art than science. You want them to be, educated guesses and good estimates. But depending on how much information you have from the request for proposal or statement of work, you may have to do a little bit of creativity in there when you create your budget as well. We talked about this yesterday as part of the sort of go or no go decision. Do you proceed with developing a proposal? But the budget is really the place to start, and thinking about whether the budget is reasonable for the scope of work that's being asked for. And in order to do that, you need to know, what your pricing strategy or approach is, or what you expect to earn in a given project. So I'm not going to go into this in great detail. There's some other great resources around pricing that I'll share in the chat as well. So ICCI did a previous workshop around, figuring out what your daily rate is. But essentially, thinking about it from that perspective, just a straight estimate of how much time what are all the tasks involved in this project, how much time is each task going to take me, and then if you have a daily rate or an hourly rate that you're using, the math is simple to figure out what the total cost would be. Now, depending on your client, often you're working with a fixed budget, if you know the budget. So they've said, okay, there's $50,000 for this. And so sometimes it does take a little bit of work to figure out, okay, which line item needs, how much money or how much time. And, if you have a daily rate or an hourly rate that you're working with, that's relatively simple using a time-based approach. The other strategy that sometimes people use is a value-based approach to pricing. So this is where it's not strictly maybe connected to the amount of time that you're expecting to spend on it, but you're considering other factors beyond just your daily or hourly rate that you want to learn. So you might look at the complexity of the task or the level of expertise required, the clarity that the client has, and adjust your pricing based on some of those other factors or based on the value that you're delivering to the client. So again, I'm not going to get into great detail about that, but those are a couple of places that you can start in terms of thinking about what your pricing strategy is going to be. And then once you have that, it's really just looking at the scope of the work, the key tasks involved, and then the estimate of how much time is going to be required. So this is where most consultants, I think, track their time. I know I do and have for many years. And so having time from past projects to look at is really, really helpful. So if that's not something that you're already doing, there's lots of tools out there that can help you do this. You can even use a basic spreadsheet for it. But that is another great way to have a more educated guess or estimate around how much time different tasks are going to take you. There's other rules of thumb that you can use. So for example, if we're doing hour-long interviews, we always budget double the time for analysis. That's one strategy. So there's different strategies like that that you can use to help you develop some educated guesses around the time estimate. If you're brand new to consulting and you're just really not sure, this is where you can ask a mentor or a colleague for support. And Vanessa's going to talk a little bit later about the CES mentorship program that exists. So that's a great opportunity there to potentially get set up with a mentor and have the opportunity to have someone that you can, reach out and ask about pricing. We talked briefly yesterday about the budget and if you are given a budget or not. So if you have a request for proposal or statement of work that does not have a budget provided, there are some strategies that you can use. So sometimes if it's a procurement for a provincial or federal government or even municipal government, or sometimes bigger nonprofits, they might have rules about how they do their procurement. So over X amount, it has to be sent to 3 vendors. Over, Y amount, it has to be a public RFP. So typically, if it's like a publicly posted government RFP, that's generally a larger project. So that can help you if you know those procurement thresholds, and that's usually public information that you can find. That can help you at least get a sense of the budget or what the scope of the budget might be. If you don't know that, maybe you know the total project cost, and you could use that. Sometimes a rule of thumb that people use is 10% for evaluation. So that might be another strategy to give you another idea. And if neither of those work, see if you can find out from the client other aspects of the scope. So, often an RFP will come out that says, develop an evaluation plan and then conduct the evaluation. Well, that's pretty challenging to budget because you don't know what the evaluation is going to include because you haven't planned it yet. So maybe the client has some ideas there, or maybe you can just make some assumptions about what might be in it. We're going to do 25 interviews and that's going to be this. And then, of course, if it changes, during the evaluation planning process, you have to adapt. So those are a few tips for when there's no budget provided. But as we talked about yesterday, sometimes that's, a red flag or a reason for not proceeding is because they're not giving clear parameters around the budget. A couple other things I'll just mention about pricing. So if you are part of a team, you should think about, does your team need different rates? So maybe there's like a junior person and a senior person, and are you going to charge different rates for that? And how is that going to work? If it's a multi-year project, what will happen to your rates over time? So let's say you're committing to 5 years of work. Are you committing to the same, per diem or daily rate over that whole 5 years? Or is there an opportunity to, have a rate adjustment partway through? So consider that. And, at the end of the day, regardless of whether you use time-based pricing, value-based pricing, whatever your strategy is, you are often working with a fixed budget, right? So people are telling you, my budget is 50,000, this is the work I want done. And you have to see if you can kind of do it within that scope. And many clients, especially in government, like they request that you give a per diem rate, whether that's daily or hourly. So it's hard to get around that completely and go to only a value-based pricing strategy. Sometimes it can be strategic, again, depending on the scope of the work and whether this is feasible for you. Sometimes it can be strategic to bid a little bit under. So if you know the budget, maybe you want to come slightly under if that's realistic. Maybe, their budget is huge for what you think you need to charge and you can come way under, So those are kind of strategic things that you need to consider when you're thinking about pricing and the overall. Spreadsheets and templates for this are great. I have one I reuse over and over. That just saves time. And Vanessa's going to talk a lot more about templates in her section, but that's really helpful for budget. But just make sure that you adapt it to what the client is asking for in the RFP or SOW. Oftentimes, there is a specific form that you have to fill out with your pricing. Sometimes clients want it done, by deliverable, and the deliverable is organized in a certain way. So just make sure that you if you have a template, that you're adapting it as needed to whatever format the client is requesting. And Gail, I think, mentioned this yesterday as well, but sometimes you have to submit a completely separate document with your pricing in a kind of separate submission from the rest of your proposal. And other times it can be combined into one file. It just depends on the requirements. The pricing around time and value is, for your consulting time, but you also want to think about other expenses that might be related to the project. Is there going to be travel? We always used to factor in money for like printing and things like that, although that's not so important anymore. But definitely if the project involves travel or other, like maybe you need certain technology platforms or whatever that you need to charge for. So we often, for example, when we're running group sessions that people might participate in, we use the Zoom 1-800 number. Like, we want to provide a toll-free number. There's a cost to that. So there could be other costs that you need to include as well. Make sure that you include project management time, liaise time, especially if you're working with a team. You need internal time for your team to meet and plan, as well as for meeting and planning with the client. But you have to kind of balance it to the overall budget. So my impression is that clients don't want to see a huge kind of budget for project management as a portion of the overall budget. So it's always good to just kind of, you don't want a $50,000 budget where $30,000 is for project management, right? You want to keep it in line. And then for data collection and analysis, again, it's just thinking through, okay, if these are the methods, this is maybe how much time I need for the data collection part, and what's a realistic time for analysis. And that can be hard to know sometimes, especially if you don't know exactly what the data is that you're going to have and all of that. So it's really just kind of taking your best guess on that. So those are just some of the kind of tips and strategies that you could think of for budgeting and scoping the work. And I'll share in the chat a couple of links to some other workshops and a template around level of effort calculators and value-based pricing, so that if people are interested in those things, you can explore them a little bit more. And with that, I think I'm turning it back to you, Vanessa.
Thank you. I learned I learned something, Claire. Thank you so much, because I've been a consultant for about 8 years, and I'm in my first time of having a 5-year contract. And when I signed that contract, I did not think at all about what my rates might be over time. So good point. I'll also just mention that I'm uh, loving the introductions that people are sharing of themselves in the chat. We are going to find a way to distribute the copies of the chat to you, because I think it's just useful to save these, so that in the future, if you are like, oh, I really wish I could connect with somebody who lives here or has experience in this or speaks this language or whatever it is, you have an automatic repertoire of people interested in certain things in Canada. Okay, so I'm going to be talking for the next half hour. Then we'll, as I mentioned, we will then do present a few other topics and move at the end to the Q&A. In this half hour, I'm going to share tips and tricks for proposal writing. A new client once told me that what distinguished my proposal from the others that they had received is that I had requested to speak with them and to ask clarifying questions about their RFP before preparing my proposal. So apparently, they could tell from the content of my proposal that I understood their needs better than the rest, even though the client and I had never worked together before. And it's not every type of client whose procurement process allows them to meet with you prior to submitting a proposal. But when that is an option, as is the case with many smaller organizations, I strongly recommend that you jump on that chance. So if the RFP doesn't specify whether or not a meeting with a client to clarify their needs is possible, ask for it and explain that the purpose of the meeting is to allow you to provide them with a proposal that best meets their needs. A lot of organizations, especially in government, have procurement processes that prohibit them from speaking directly with potential bidders. In these cases, they'll usually indicate in the RFP by what date inquiries can be submitted in writing and how to submit them. So this isn't as good as being able to have a live conversation that lets you gather information from verbal, nonverbal cues, establish rapport, and really get a feel for the client and the project that they want to undertake. But it nonetheless allows you to get clarification on the RFP and the evaluation project at hand. Before you send the client your written questions, find out if they intend to share those questions and their responses with other potential bidders. So if they do, which many organizations have a policy of doing, they take all the questions they received and then they send out, here's the questions, here's the answers to everybody who's expressed interest in the bid. If this is the case, you need to be strategic about how you phrase your questions, or maybe you don't ask them at all, depending, to avoid giving other bidders your good ideas. So for example, rather than asking if it will be possible to get access to the program beneficiary's contact info so that you can invite them to participate in case studies, which would tip all other bidders about your great idea to do case studies, ask instead whether there are logistic constraints when it comes to including program beneficiaries in the evaluation design. Okay, I've outlined on the slide the steps that I follow when responding to an RFP, and we're going to go through these together now in sequence. Between yesterday and today, Claire has already covered steps 1 to 3 in quite some detail, so I'm not going to repeat what she said. I will note, though, that some of the info that feeds into making a decision regarding whether or not to prepare a proposal will later feed into your writing of proposal sections. So the difference is that you will probably want to go into much more depth in your proposal or your understanding to write your proposal so that you can demonstrate your understanding and propose an evaluation approach that aligns with the realities and the context of the project. Okay, let's focus for a moment on understanding the RFP. The main types of information that you'll need to retrieve in a cursory way at first, so directly from the RFP, and then in a more detailed way, include logistics. So for example, the project purpose, budget, start and end dates, submission method, timelines. You also need to understand the eligibility requirements, so mandatory criteria like a language requirement, you need to be bilingual, or security requirement, or a type of education that the successful bidder must have. There's also selection or rated criteria, and these might also include some bonus criteria, like being a credentialed evaluator is one that I see often. You want to develop a really good understanding of the client's profile, of the program or initiative that they're evaluating, and of the proposed work itself, so the reason for the RFP. As we go through the steps of the proposal response workflow that I showed you, I'll suggest prompts that you can copy paste into AI to help you with your process. So there's one on the slide now. And after the workshop, we're going to share a document with these prompts and some others as well. Of course, you need to be careful about what information you feed the AI. Usually RFPs do not contain proprietary or private information. So they can be uploaded without much concern, especially in the case of open competitions where the general public is invited to bid on the opportunity and their RFP is already on the website. However, your proposal likely contains information about individuals in the form of yourself and evaluation team members' bios and CVs. So my suggestion is to use paid versions of AI. Claire did speak about this yesterday as well, because they have higher security features. You should check them, don't assume, but usually the paid versions have higher security features that don't use the information you upload to train their model. And by the way, when I say you should check them, I mean regularly, because their security levels for privacy change over time within the same software. Also, I know that in ChatGPT and likely other similar apps, you can turn off the AI's memory. I do that. It doesn't get to know me as well, which is a downside, but it's safer for the information that I'm putting in. And I still never put in, it's a topic for another time, but I never put in, an identified data that hasn't been stripped of identifying information. So still, it's best to get permission from each person on your team before uploading their bios and CVs to the AI. In most cases, independent consultants probably won't mind because they've already put that same info on their website and on LinkedIn as part of their marketing strategies. Another thing is to be sure not to upload information about projects that you've worked on that contain protected information. So, though you probably shouldn't be including, so you probably shouldn't be including that information in your proposal anyways, but don't send a project description that contains private information about that organization or that project. Another piece of advice about using AI for proposal development is that in general, it tends to be pretty good at reacting to information that you feed it. So it can extract specific info from existing text, as in the case with the prompt that you see on the slide. And it can review text in light of specific criteria that you give it. And it can even merge information from different sources. Where I don't find that technology works as well, or at least not yet, is when you ask the AI to make interpretations or to write text from scratch. So it's fine for writing a short email, but not so great for writing full sections of a proposal. And that's when the hallucinations start creeping in, and it also doesn't always focus on the most salient points unless you're very explicit in your prompts. Okay, so let's move on to the next step of our proposal development workflow. Yesterday, Gail shared two great templates with you, one for informal and one for formal proposals. As she mentioned, it's important to prioritize the proposal sections identified either explicitly or implicitly by the RFP, including mirroring the exact wording used in the RFP. Don't leave the selection committee guessing where to look in your proposal to find the info that they need to rate. If they called it relevant project experience, don't call it prior projects. Use their words. Okay. Another great way to do this is to include a qualifications key or crosswalk, whatever you want to call it, right at the start of your proposal, maybe right after the table of contents, that lists all the eligibility and selection criteria from the proposal in one column, and then in the next column, the proposal sections where the raters will be able to find the exact information that responds to those criteria. Having said this, after you've identified the proposal sections based on the content of the RFP, go back to the template that Gail shared yesterday and add sections from these templates that are missing. So for example, just because the RFP didn't indicate that you must include a cover letter or an introduction to your proposal, it's probably still a good idea to do so. Before putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboard, Gather all of the background information that you will feed into each section of your proposal. In general, you'll be gathering two types of background info and materials. Your reusable, or perhaps I should say updatable texts that you've written for prior proposals, like your bio and project descriptions, as well as reference information that others have written and that you can find either in academic literature, like research relevant to the program, or scholarly references for specific evaluation methods, or in the grade literature, like on the internet. AI can help you search for this new information. So as per the prompt on the slide, you can ask ChatGPT, Claude, an AI of your choice, to do a search for information about the client, the program, their partners, etc. Or, as Claire just taught me yesterday, no, maybe last week, you can use the AI app called Perplexity, which apparently produces better results. And you can also use more targeted GPTs, or in other words, AI apps, like Elicit, to search scholarly publications and even produce rudimentary research reports. So for proposal writing purposes, the free version I found will usually suffice. If you wanted to do a really systematic document review, you probably want to pay for a subscription, but for your proposal writing, that's not required usually. As you can see from this table, the reusable or updatable text that you wrote in the past for other RFPs can be used to develop certain sections of the proposal more quickly without reinventing the wheel. So that includes the description, these sections of your outline, description of your firm, your team bios and CVs, descriptions of the projects that you've worked on, the contact info for your references, and even the way that the budget and schedule of payment sections are worded and formatted and appear from your prior proposals can be reused as templates, as long as, of course, you update the details to match the RFP that you're working on. I nonetheless highly recommend tailoring each of these reusable sections to the specific RFP, because this signals to your client that you wouldn't be using a cookie cutter approach. Your work for them would be tailored to their needs, and it allows you to demonstrate the value added of choosing you throughout the proposal. So in the description of your firm, in your bios, and in your prior project descriptions, make sure to include information that demonstrates how you meet the RFP's specific requirements. For example, if the last time you included a particular project description was to demonstrate that you have experience evaluating community programming, and this time around you're including that same project, but to demonstrate your experience with semi-structured interviews, you have to adapt the project description to the new context. In other words, tailor reusable content so that it's anchored in the client's specific context and project needs. And of course, if you're new to consulting, you won't have prior texts to draw from, and you will actually need to invent the proverbial wheel. It's a slower part of your journey as an independent consultant, but it's also one that you'll benefit from greatly when responding to future RFPs. And with this in mind, another tip I'll share about reusable or adaptable proposal sections is save yourself valuable time by keeping copies of all your prior bios and project descriptions in one consolidated document. So I forced myself into the habit of transferring my tailored bio and project descriptions into one document as soon as I submit a proposal. And then I add searchable tags for each. So for example, I might say NFP to indicate this is about not-for-profit organizations, or science and technology for the field, or participatory for my evaluation approach in that particular one, or GBA plus, or focus groups, because that was included in the methodology. So when it comes time to do the next proposal, I can just search for those tags. Okay, and by the way, as we'll see in a few minutes, this one-stop shop compiled document becomes all the more useful when you use AI for proposal development. Even though your proposal will include a lot of content that you've written before and then adapted to the RFP, there will still be new sections to write from scratch. For example, if you're writing a formal proposal, you'll probably want to include sections that demonstrate your understanding of the initiative, the need for the evaluation objectives, and of course the RFP is going to contain that relevant information. But I recommend not replacing the wording contained in the RFP. Okay, so don't just copy paste, this is what you said the purpose of the project is. I've copy pasted it into my proposal. Because that's not going to demonstrate to the client that you truly understand their needs. So try paraphrasing while making sure to capture key elements and to use RFP terminology for key terms and contexts. And by the way, I didn't include a prompt for this, but AI is pretty good at that. You can say, like, take this and paraphrase it, please. It's also helpful to demonstrate your understanding beyond simply what's written in the RFP. So look for and include here relevant contextual information about the organization, the program, the problem that the program is aiming to address, results of relevant academic research, information about evaluations of similar programs, perhaps in other fields or other countries. Your goal here is not to flood the client with additional information, but to select a few strategically chosen tidbits that demonstrate how well you understand their needs. And again, paraphrasing the information you found through other sources is the way to go, and reference the sources that you're drawing from using recognized referencing standards. Okay, so on the slide, I put proposal approach and methodology halfway between reusable and new proposal sections, because often you are writing these from scratch, but sometimes you can draw on your prior texts. So for example, if you already have a great description of your developmental evaluation approach or of the process you follow for conducting focus groups, use it. Just make sure to tailor it to the RFP, of course. And how creative you can be when writing some sections from scratch will depend on the RFP itself. So there are clients who state that evaluation objectives and project timelines in the RFP, they state them very clearly, like this is what you must do. And there are others who provide very, very little guidance on like the methods, et cetera. They just say, okay, here's the overall objective, the timelines, but that's it. I find those that provide little guidance quite fun to respond to, because then I can be creative in what I propose and I can draw on my particular skills and experiences to meet the needs of the clients in a way that I judge to be the most sound and then align with the client's needs. So that really, I get to show what the true value of hiring Vanessa, because this is Vanessa's creativity based on years of experience and knowledge going into this design. The danger here is that if I don't have a good understanding of the client's realities, my proposal could be way off. So at the other end of the spectrum, some clients are very prescriptive. You must do this. Here's your methods, here's the deliverables, here's the timelines. We just need somebody to execute it who has the experience and skills to do so. And in these cases, stick to what they're asking for and focus on demonstrating how you will produce high quality deliverables within the project timelines and budget. There could be opportunities for negotiation, but especially if you're starting off, I would, as a consultant, or you don't know the client, I would just give them what they want. They're being very clear that this is what we want. Okay, back to our workflow. So as we transition from information gathering into writing the sections of the proposal, what you see on the slide is an AI prompt for writing your short bio. And it's based on what you feed the AI, which is that consolidated document of your prior bios that you've written for past projects, your CV, and the RFP requirements. And this prompt works kind of well, but you still end up having to do a lot of editing. Also, the AI tends to be very enthusiastic in its writing style unless you explicitly instruct it otherwise. So you have to edit all of that out because otherwise it just exaggerates and it makes you seem completely wonderful and like the best consultant ever when all you said was, well, I have 2 projects that I've worked on in this field before. Okay, in this prompt, which I prefer, you're feeding the AI the same documents that I just described, CV, your compilation of bios, the RFP. However, instead of asking the AI to write your short bio for you, you're asking it to extract the information from these documents that will be the most pertinent to include in your bio, which you will then draft. So when I tried this, the AI prompt, when I tried this AI prompt rather, it produced a long, helpful list of categorized information that I could include in my bio. And not all of that information that it produced was great, or even necessarily fully accurate, or even necessarily fully complete, but it was a great starting point rather than staring at a blank page. And it was easy enough for me to ignore the parts that I don't want to use. And after you've written a first draft of your bio, then that's where the AI really shines. You give it to the AI and you give it, and you ask it to review your bio in the context that, to make sure that it's meeting the RFP criteria, that it's clear, etc. And we're going to look at how to ask the AI to review your work in a minute. Okay, but first let's talk briefly about drafting sections of your proposal. So between yesterday and today's sessions, we already talked a lot about this. I'm not going to dwell. However, I'll talk a bit about the order in which you should develop each section. So there's no hard and fast rule about this. I'm just going to share my approach as food for thought. What I'd like to start with is my proposal outline. And what I do is I take that outline and I put it into my independent consulting firm is called Vanistas. So I put it into Vanastas's letterhead so that I start from the get-go using my branding, my colors, my fonts, formatting. Of course, I'll check that again later before submitting, but it just sort of makes the process easier. Then, so I've got my outline in my letterhead, and then I jot down the info that I already have into each section, relevant section of the proposal. So I'll note the specific requirements of the RFP for this section and that section. I'll paste in my reusable materials or the drafts that I have of them. I'll include the background info that I found through my search of the gray and the academic literature. And then I focus on writing one section at a time. And if while I'm writing one section, I think of info or, it seems like, oh, it will be important if I'm saying this here to pick that up again in that other section, then I just quickly jot down a note in that other section and go back to writing one section, my initial section. One thing to keep an eye out is that some RFPs assign weights to each selection criteria. So like, for example, your work plan is worth 15%. The relevance of the consultant's experience is worth 30% of how we're going to score or rate your proposal. So because the reality is that we're often juggling multiple projects and scrambling to submit proposals on time, I suggest writing the sections that are worth the most first. Also, because we're often scrambling to submit proposals on time, it's a good idea to consciously set aside enough time to review the full draft and do a quality check before finalizing and submitting the document. So in this step, check for RFP alignment, whether all required sections and information requested in the RFP are addressed. Look for RFP format and basic compliance. Does the RFP tell you that it wants a particular page length or order of information? Check that you've done that. Check for structure and logical flow. So clarity, organization of ideas. Check for consistency. Are information and data across all sections aligned? Is the tone, the terminology and acronyms, the reference style consistent throughout the document? Look for clarity and readability. So is this proposal rather, is the proposal easy to follow? And then polish it. There's nothing worse in a proposal than grammar, spelling mistakes, awkward phrasing. So if you can, have someone you trust review your proposal with fresh eyes to spot gaps that you may have missed. Or I should say, or ask the AI. So when your full draft is ready, upload your RFP and your proposal into the AI, once again, making sure that you remove any identifying information that shouldn't be shared publicly. And then the prompt on this slide should produce a table flagging areas for improvement and offering recommendations for your consideration. So it's just like a big table and it's got all these criteria that I just mentioned on the past slide, and it'll check for them. Time permitting, you can also work section by section with the AI. So you feed it, here's the RFP requirement just for that section, and ask for a compliance check. Okay, so that brings me to the end of the tips on proposal writing. We can move on straight to Claire, or we have like 3 minutes. If Gail and Claire, you wanted to add anything about proposal writing?
Oh, this is terrific, Vanessa. You've covered so much.
Okay, thanks. Claire, on to you.
Okay, so I'm just noticing that Susan's adding a couple things in the chat from the client point of view to look for in terms of quality assurance. So that's really helpful. Thank you, Susan. So spelling and grammar, outdated descriptions, no information or qualifications about the team, call center staff assigned. So this is areas where you can lose points, and it's always helpful to get feedback. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. So you've written your proposal. You'll see that the first bullet says, plan to complete your proposal at least 1 day in advance. That is a wonderful plan and something that we should all aspire to. I'm sure many of you on this call that are experienced consultants have also submitted your proposal 1 minute before the deadline. Because as Vanessa said, we're often busy and we have lots of other things going on. But in an ideal world, complete your proposal in advance, and that gives you the time to do the quality checks that Vanessa was talking about, and really make sure that it is a good, high quality proposal that you're submitting. The other thing is that many, even more and more so these days, you need to make sure that you're familiar with the details of how to submit. So, when we were discussing this, the three of us as a group, we were reminiscing about when you had to print out a paper package, sometimes 10 different copies of it, and bind it, and, sometimes go in person to the opening or to submit it. Or get a courier or whatever. Those days are generally done. But on the flip side of that, you have different technology platforms that you might have to use to submit. So make sure that you know what the expectations are for the format you have to use, the different number of files that are included. We've talked a lot about, the proposal writing itself, but sometimes there are other forms that have to be completed and signed. I once had like a last minute scramble because I had to have a form signed that required a witness to sign it. And I was kind of, oh my God, I have to submit this in half an hour. Who can be the witness? So, um, make sure that you're familiar with all those submission requirements and give yourself plenty of time for that process so that you can make sure that everything goes in smoothly and you don't, need to be scrambling at the last minute to kind of figure out those details. So another example is I recently submitted for something that required, rather than one document, the proposal had to be, each section had to be its own separate document and like uploaded separately. So you don't want to have to be dealing with these things at the end and kind of be in a mad rush for that. And then once all of that work is done and you have submitted, give yourself a pat on the back and make sure that you celebrate the work that you've done, because proposal writing is hard and it takes a lot of time. So now I'm going to talk about some potential response scenarios and what happens after you submit the proposal. So in an ideal world, the first one is you win. Yay. When we were talking about this, once you win, now is the time to look at the contract details. Maybe you need to negotiate on the contract. Vanessa also had suggested ask for feedback when you win, right? So ask your client maybe in the kickoff meeting, what was it about our proposal that, made you want to pick us? And I thought that was a great tip. I have not done that before. And what a great way to get, that positive feedback. Sometimes there's an interim stage before you win. So you might be asked for additional information. You might be invited to an interview. And then there's some further information that you have to prepare. So again, more common with a bigger contract where there's like that interview stage as well to get more information about your proposal. So then another scenario, which you just had up there, Vanessa, is that you lose. And frankly, if you write enough proposals, you're going to lose. So just mentally prepare yourself that a certain proportion of the time you are going to lose, and that's just part of the process and it's to be expected. So although it's disappointing, try not to take it personally or get too upset about it, because that's just the way it goes in this business. And I heard someone say, depending on what your goals are for your consulting practice or your company, I heard someone say that if you're not losing enough, then you're not taking enough risks. You're not trying for enough projects that are maybe a little bit outside of your scope or your comfort area. So if you're happy where you are, then that's fine. But especially if you're interested in growing, you really do have to push to those other opportunities. And that's going to mean probably losing more frequently. If you lose, make sure you ask for feedback. So most of the time there's a process for that to get feedback on your proposal. If there was like a formal scoring process with evaluation criteria, they'll give you your scores. Often like with government, that's the kind of debrief they will provide. Other organizations may just give you feedback. And, often when we ask for feedback, we hear things like, oh, your proposal was really great. We really loved this about it, but we ended up going with another consultant who had XYZ experience or whatever. And I have also heard feedback saying, oh, well, you didn't address this topic, or it was missing this content that we were looking for. And so that's really helpful, right? So it's always valuable, especially as evaluators, to get feedback. There's also some kind of in-between scenarios that might happen. So one thing is you could be asked to revise and resubmit. So maybe the client has had changes to their requirements, or after reviewing proposals, they want to clarify some things. So that is something that could happen before they make a decision. You can also get no response. So I think most of us, again, have probably bid on different things and then had to wait a very long time, way longer probably than we expected, to get a response. In that case, it's good to follow up. If there's a contact person or a procurement person listed, that's the person that you can connect with and just politely say, hey, any update? Do you know when you might make a decision? Sometimes they can give you a timeline and sometimes they won't. Delayed start. So again, this has happened to me where they say, okay, we love you, we want you to do the work, but we've decided we can't start for 6 more months. So then you need to think about, okay, is that realistic for me? Can I still complete the work then? Maybe there's an opportunity to sign a contract, maybe get a deposit up front to kind of guarantee your availability later down the road, and also getting that kind of commitment from the client that they're going to go ahead with the work. And that's all something that you'd have to negotiate. And then the final thing on the screen there is cancellation. So sometimes clients put out RFPs and then for whatever reason decide not to award them to anyone, and the competition is canceled either before submissions are due or after the fact. And that can be really frustrating as well. There's not much you can do about that, unfortunately, but it's always good, again, to just ask for feedback on the proposal. If they did get through any part of the review process, they might be able to give you some feedback. So those are the main options that can happen.
Claire,
Yeah.
I have one more.
Go ahead, Gail.
It's not a good one. And I think the topic is theft, because I have had situations where the information that was in my proposal suddenly found itself in the future in the work that the organization was doing, although they had rejected my proposal. So this, I guess, is just to caution you that it is not an even playing field, as I said yesterday, and that, in fact, in the world, not everybody is totally ethical. I don't think you have recourse when something like that happens, but I don't know, Vanessa or Claire, if you have had that happen or what you did about it.
I don't know that it's happened to me, but I do know that I worry about it. And as a preventative measure, I'm not sure how effective it is. I try, as a standard thing, I have a little note near the very beginning of my proposal that explains that the information contained is proprietary and cannot be replicated or reused or adapted.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the best way to try to protect yourself, but at the end of the day, there's not much you can do. Somebody wants to operate in a way that is not ethical, unless you want to sue them, right? So you don't really have much recourse. And sometimes that's a judgment call in what the content that you put in the proposal as well. So it's a balance between giving your ideas or showing your innovative approach, but also not giving away all your intellectual property in the proposal, so that they can just go, well, we're just going to do this plan as you've laid it out. We don't need to hire you for it, because that can happen for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you should hold back some of your trade secrets, I think. Without making it obvious, but also protecting yourself.
Yeah. And you can give it some information without going into, it's kind of the level of detail maybe. So you're not giving the complete plan, but you're giving them a taste of what you're going to provide.
One thing that happens often is I win a contract, I get to the kickoff meeting, and then they're like, oh, well, since we issued the RFP, we've rethought this, that, the other thing. And here's how we'd like you to change the plan that you proposed. And it could be realistically because things change in their environment, they've had time to evolve their thinking on the topic, but it could also be because other proposals they received included tips. Anyhow, Gail, I think we're moving on to your
No, I have one more slide.
oh, you did?
And
Oh,
that's all.
sorry. There, my apologies.
That's okay. So I just wanted to talk briefly about metrics, and I know I saw a comment in the chat about this. So this is something that, you know, I think as evaluators, we're all data nerds, and this is something that I have been doing for many years, and I'll share my results in a minute, but some of the key things that we look at is, so number of proposals that we've submitted from year to year, and the type of proposal. So we look at like open competition RFPs, limited competition where maybe it's only going to 3 bidders, and then a sole source. And then we do track our time. As I mentioned earlier in the budgeting section, we do know, you know, how long the proposals take us to submit, and it can really be quite variable depending on the scope and complexity of the proposal. We track our win rate, and we look at it kind of by type of client. So an existing or past client versus a brand new client. And again, by those kind of submission types that I talked about. And then another one that I just recently started looking at that was I suggested in another webinar I went to was around client average lifetime value, which I think is kind of an interesting way to look at recurring work over time, right? So you can have a very high client's lifetime value if you do a lot of projects for the same client, or maybe you just have one really big project. So it's, you know, it's adds up in different ways. It's really just like, what's the average kind of amount that you've gained from that client over time. So if you click the next there, Vanessa, it'll show my results. So you can see number of proposals submitted. We average 16 a year. Again, I'm a small firm with 4 people, so that's different context than somebody that's just one person and how many proposals you might be writing. You can see it really ranges 11 to 22 in a given year, just depending on what's going on, what the opportunities are, what other work we have. But we only, for open RFP competitions, we only average 5 per year, and the range is 0 to 12. So some years we might not submit any. The breakdown is there of approximately 40% sole source are proposals. So that's when a client is coming to us and saying, we want you to do this work. We need you to write a letter or quote or whatever. 30% those open competition RFPs, and 30% limited competitions where it's maybe just going to 3 bidders. Time per submission, again, a very wide range. That was just the average last year, between half an hour for a quick, you know, letter of quotation that doesn't have a lot of, that's like a client that we've worked with a lot that just wants kind of some basic work outlined, up to several days for a bigger, more complex proposal. Our average win rate across all proposal types is 72%. And this is over, I should say, 15 years, this data. So, you know, I think I'm pretty happy with 72%. You can see for existing clients, that's much higher because those are people that know us. They're often repeat clients, or they're sole sourcing us often. So then your win rate is usually pretty close to 100% unless the project doesn't go forward. But for RFPs, so those open competition ones, our average is only 34%. So you can see the win rate's a lot lower. However, we have won some major projects and some, you know, great new clients through those public RFPs. So they're more work, you're less likely to win them, but when you win them, the payoff can be big. So that's the consideration there, right? And we just recently won something that was a huge amount of work, is a big public competition. And when I submitted it, I thought, there's no, you know, we're not going to win this. It's not going to happen. But we did. So you just never know, right? Recurring clients, so around 50%, a little over, we have clients coming back. And that can really vary over time because it can be cyclical. You know, some clients, like for example, we do planning work sometimes, and that's only every 5 years they come back and go, okay, we need our plan updated. So that can vary. And then the last one is that average lifetime value that I talked about. So the average is 90,000. And you can see like very wide range there, right? So from a tiny $2,500 project all the way up to over $1 million of business with one specific client. And that's a client that was like many repeat projects over time. So that's just a snapshot of, metrics, what you could track. And I will give a shout out here to the Evaluation Academy. And I think Shelby from Eval Academy is here on this session because they have this project tracker, proposal tracker dashboard. And that's what I have used for many years to track some of this data. And I just put it in the chat there if anybody's interested in that as a template. So with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Gail to wrap us up.
Well, I have to say, Claire, you're so generous. Thank you so much for sharing your actual statistics like that. I think you're doing a wonderful job. It's just amazing. Just congratulations. And all I can say is, however, that so many, I'm sure, that are on the call today would give anything to be able to say that to. And yet, maybe they haven't even started yet, or maybe they're just beginning. And so there's absolutely no way that they can be having those wonderful statistics. So it is definitely a goal for everyone to be working towards. And keeping those good stats along the way, I think, is very encouraging because you can always track yourself and see how you're doing compared to last year and that sort of thing. But I guess my advice is, don't get depressed. Start small and do a fabulous job. And one step at a time, every project you do, you too will start to gain, traction like that. I'm just going to mention briefly some marketing secrets based on my experience over time, and you've heard them already, so I'm just repeating that, the RFP process is the last choice you make, that lots of work comes informally. And I noticed like Sole Source, Claire's got 40%. And so for the most part, that's kind of an informal approach, and they already know her and want to work with her. And so this is what you should be striving for as well. And the second one was the one that I horrified Vanessa with yesterday, and that is that you've got to follow the RFP, and that if you don't, they may never really look at it. I mean, I was thinking about that last night, Vanessa, and maybe they have an admin assistant who whips through the whole stack of proposals that they get, but, has this template in mind, and if it doesn't follow it, it never gets to the decision makers. So that might be the way it actually works. And as we've stressed several times, to do the budget first. I mean, you don't want to do the budget first. For me, it's always the lit review. Oh, I really am dying to read about this fabulous thing about whatever. And this project would be such a good chance to do that and learn more about it. That is a mistake. Don't go down that garden path. Do the budget first. And just a quick story to tell about the fact that it is a numbers game. And so when I started out, I got myself a little office. It was in a business incubator building, and sat down and started to be a consultant, and was hoping to get projects. I had one project that was 3 years long, so I knew that I was going to be able to pay my rent. But I started writing proposals, just madly writing proposals all over the place. Who could I where could I find one? What could I do? I didn't even know how to write a proposal when I started. And I eventually had a whole filing cabinet full of proposals. And I was getting a bit depressed because I thought, well, do I have to do this much work, for only this much in actual projects? And so I, tried to circulate in the business community in Calgary. I joined the Chamber of Commerce. I'm now an honorary member. I joined, everything that a Canadian Evaluation Society had going on, and went to other sort of business meetings and whatnot. And I was a certified management consultant as well. And so I went to a wine and cheese one time and talked to a certified management consultant. And these were kind of the gurus in the community. These were the big companies, at that point it was the big five. consulting companies. And so I was talking to this guy from one of them, and he had a couple of glasses of wine, and I was saying, well, I mean, I just don't know what success should look like. And he said, well, in our company, it's 1 in 6. And so that meant that for 6 proposals they wrote, they got 1. So I filed this away and ran home and counted the proposals that were in my filing cabinet. And I came up with 1 in 4. So from then on, I was a happy camper. And I was able to, think in terms of, well, I may not get this proposal, but it's only number 3. I'm sure I'm going to get the next one. And it just helped to ease the pain associated. So I just wanted to pass that story along.
And maybe I'll just add to that, it can be like you do have to kind of mentally prepare yourself, like I said, for losing. And I've certainly had strings where I've submitted 5, 6 proposals in a row and lost them all. And then, by the end of that, you're kind of going, oh my gosh, am I ever going to work again? Like, what's happening here? Am I doing something wrong? But it often, may not even have anything to do with you necessarily, but kind of how you compare. Somebody else had more specific expertise, or somebody knew somebody, or whatever. So you really have to work at not taking it personally. And it is good to have, goals and targets and things to work towards, but you have to expect to lose.
Yeah, and I tend to be a little fatalistic too, and just keep my ear to the ground. And over time, I have often found that I was really happy that I didn't get that particular project, because it turned out to be a nightmare project for whatever reason. And so I felt like someone was taking care of me, to not take that project in the first place. So you got to have fun with this. I mean, it's stimulating, it's challenging, it's horrible, it's wonderful, and we love it.
I'm just going to, in the interest of time, and because Gail, I would like you to talk about collegiality, because I think that's such an important point. Before you do, I want to make sure we have some time for questions. One of the questions, and I'm asking it because it's related to what you were just talking about, is so Paisley says that the stories that you're sharing are very valuable for those starting out. She's appreciative. She says, how much time per week or month do you usually dedicate to proposal writing? And writing, I assume, to proposals.
Well, I can share what we do. So it's not a certain, it's not as easy as a percentage per week or per month, because it really depends on the opportunities and when things come up. But we do weekly search for proposal opportunities. So, we have our sites that we go to. Vanessa talked about a lot of those yesterday. And make sure that we're regularly searching. And then in terms of the time required, like, it really just depends. Sometimes they kind of come all at once, and you have to try to figure that into your workload. And other times, months can go by without really having to submit anything, just depending on kind of what the opportunities are and what your own workload is like. So I don't know, Gail or Vanessa, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's great. There's also, just relatedly, before we get back to Gail, a discussion going on in the chat, because Janice was asking if folks are finding that the current market for RFPs and proposals is quiet relative to other times. So the ICCI last spring held a town hall related to this topic, because I think these are difficult times. In evaluation, there's a lot of change going on. There's the federal budget coming up in November. I think it's November 4th. We can expect that'll have ramifications from the federal government through the layers of government, provincial, municipal, and then down to all of those who receive funding, grants from the federal government, community organizations. There's shifting political contexts both here and with our neighbors to the south. It affects especially those working in international development. But one thing that I think we talked about at the town hall was that yes, indeed, people are seeing that it's much slower now. And all I can say is that I've been assured by my mentors, my independent consulting mentors, that there is a pendulum swing and that things they dip, but then eventually they come back up. So that's why, topic for another time, so important to have a nest egg. Gail, maybe with that, could you talk about collegiality?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I just wanted to say with all this, we've been talking, writing proposals, and it's a competition and you're competing against other evaluators and hoping you're going to get the project. And that's the game. But on the other hand, these colleagues are your best friends. And so I just want to encourage you to get to know them, to continue to work together and so on, because you could be competing one day, but you could be on the same project the next day. I mean, maybe you'll find that they have some skills that you really need, and that together you're much stronger than you are alone. And sometimes people end up deciding that they're going to work together permanently. I am so grateful to all the evaluation colleagues that I've met over the years, and I wouldn't be here today talking about this the way I am without them. I wouldn't have published a book without them. I mean, I met many evaluators over the years when I was going to the American Evaluation Association, worked with them on panels, which is another topic I want to talk about. But I had this book, the first one that I wrote about, how to be an independent consultant, and it was turned down by Guilford Press. And so I was feeling very sorry for myself. And I talked to this friend of mine who was a consultant, and she said, "Oh, well, I am writing a book and we're doing it with Sage, and I just happened to be meeting them for lunch." This is when we're in the conference hotel today. "So why don't you come downstairs to the restaurant just at, 12:05 or whatever, and I'll pretend that I'm surprised to see you, and I'll introduce you to the Sage person." And that's what happened, and that's where the book was published. So without her intervention in that particular case, it never would have happened. And I have other stories I could tell that are just the same. So we need each other and we're stronger together.
Couldn't agree more. I would call my evaluation consulting peers both invaluable colleagues that help my livelihood and, fabulous friends that I intend to keep for life, even if we sometimes compete against each other on the same RFP.
And when you lose to a colleague that does really great work, then that there's something okay about that too. You go, okay, I know this project is, even if I'm disappointed I didn't win it, I know that somebody great is going to be taking it on. So
Yeah, and as you said yesterday, Claire, sometimes you know that somebody else is more appropriate for a particular project. You just recommend them. And of
yeah.
course, this is wonderful. They're so happy that you recommended them, that you made a friend for life that way. Yeah.
I see there's a couple questions in the chat.